Carl Jung's most overlooked discovery was never about how to become the kind of person a room turns toward. It was about what always happens to someone right before they do, and it is almost the exact opposite of what anyone would guess. Before a person becomes genuinely magnetic, their world goes quiet. The people who used to seek them out start to drift. The room gets smaller. They feel less seen than they used to, not more. And because that feels like decline, this is the precise moment where almost everyone panics, reaches back for the attention they used to have, and shuts the whole process down one step before the payoff. Not because anything has gone wrong, but because the one thing that has to happen first is the one thing that feels most like failure. Jung found that this quiet does one of two things to a person. It either breaks them or it turns them into someone genuinely rare. Which one it becomes depends almost entirely on whether they understand what is actually happening to them while they are inside it. That understanding is what this video is for. Consider a man we will call Daniel. Not a real patient, but a composite, built out of a pattern Jung watched repeat in person after person. Daniel is in his mid-30s, an ordinary job, nothing about him that would stop anyone on the street. For most of his life, he was the one everyone called, the funny one at the table, the reliable one who always showed up with the right energy in the room. If a gathering was flat, Daniel was the one who lifted it. Then something shifted, and he did not decide it. He simply started editing himself less. He stopped reaching for the joke he did not feel. He stopped preloading the story with the version that always landed. He let a silence sit, instead of rushing to fill it for somebody else. Slowly, the calls thinned out. The room went quiet around him. He read it the way anyone would read it. Something is wrong with me. Whatever I used to have, I'm losing it. Here is what was actually happening, and it matters that we get this part exact, because this is where most videos about becoming magnetic drive straight off a cliff. Daniel was not imagining the quiet, and he was not causing it by giving off some low, invisible frequency the universe was answering. Something specific and physical was happening instead. The energy he used to spend performing had begun to withdraw, and the people who had organized themselves around that performance genuinely had less to respond to. The quiet was real. The cause of it was mechanical, not magical. So sit with the strange shape of this. Daniel did not become less magnetic. He ran out of willingness to keep performing the version of himself that was easy for everyone else to be around. And the people who had only ever wanted that version were left with nothing to hold on to. Some nights the screen is the wrong place for this. If you'd rather just listen, Surreal Mind is on Spotify now, the words in the dark, wherever you are, links in the description. Now, this pattern is not only a Jungian idea, a version of it is well documented in modern sociology. Erving Goffman, in his book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, described how every one of us runs what he called a front stage, a managed performance we put on for other people. And Goffman's key observation was that the effort of running that front stage leaks. People can eventually feel the management happening underneath the performance. So a performed self is never free. It costs something to run, constantly, and on some level, everyone around it can sense the cost. Because that performance carries a running cost, something has to happen when a person finally stops paying it. Goffman named the stage. Jung went one step further and named what the energy actually does once it comes off that stage. And here is the part that makes it feel personal instead of academic. Almost nobody fully stops performing, so almost nobody ever finds out. The ones who do stop enter a specific, nameable passage. It has a shape, and it has stages, and almost nobody is ever told it exists. This passage is what I call the great quieting. To understand why the great quieting hurts the way it does, we have to understand what Jung meant by the persona. The persona is the social face, the official airs, as he put it, the role a person plays so that others know how to place them. And Jung was precise about the cost of it. He wrote that the aim of individuation, his word for becoming who a person actually is nothing less than to divest the self of the false wrappings of the persona. Divest, take off, not adjust the mask, remove it. Running that mask has an ongoing price, paid every single day in attention and energy and quiet self-editing. That price is what I call the persona tax. And the great quieting is simply what it looks like from the inside, when a person finally, often without meaning to, stops paying that tax. This gives us the paradox at the very center of the whole process, and it deserves a name because everything else hangs off it. Call it the withdrawal paradox, the exact thing that will eventually make a person magnetic, pulling their energy back out of the performed self so it can recollect into something real, is the same thing that first makes them feel invisible. The strength and the wound are the same event, felt at two different moments. Nobody gets the first without passing through the second. There is no version of this where the room stays full the whole way through. There is a second mechanism underneath the loss too, one that takes the blame off the person going through it. That performed self was doing unpaid work for everyone around it. It was being easy, being available, being the dependable good energy that asked for nothing back. The people close to it had hung something on that performance. In Jung's language, they had hung their projections on it. So when the persona tax stops being paid, those projections have nothing left to land on, and the people carrying them feel that loss directly. Some drift, some push back. Some say the person has changed, and not kindly. It reads, from the inside, like rejection. It is closer to a room full of projections coming home, and finding the wall they used to hang on has been taken down. That is why the great quieting can feel so much like loneliness, even when there are still people around. Jung described that exact texture. He wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. That is the great quieting, precisely, surrounded and still unreachable, because the version of them that was easy to reach is the one going offline. If the room has gone quiet around you lately, and you have been reading it as losing something, comment, I didn't know the quiet had a name. The great quieting does not arrive the same way for everyone. It tends to take one of three forms, and it is worth knowing which one is loudest, because they get misread in different ways. The first form is the social thinning. This is the visible one. Specific people drift off, not everyone, and rarely with any drama. It is usually the ones whose interest always seem to track one particular version of the person's energy, the entertaining version, the endlessly available version. When that version powers down, their reason for being there powers down with it. The second form is the internal flattening. This one is quieter and harder to see because it happens inside. The person's own performances stop satisfying them. The role they used to enjoy playing feels hollow now, even when it still works on other people. This is the persona tax being felt from the inside before the outside world has caught up to it at all. The third form is the misread, and it is the one that carries the most risk. Here the person reads the quiet as depression, as proof that something is broken in them, and they reach for an explanation that sends them backward instead of through. And this is worth saying plainly, because the great quieting can genuinely look like low mood from the inside. If that heaviness is real for someone, this reframe is not meant to replace real support. It sits alongside it. The point is only that the quiet, by itself, is not automatically the emergency it feels like. Which of the three is loudest for you right now? The social thinning, the internal flattening, or the misread? Comment the number. Now here is where the stakes climb, because misreading the great quieting has real consequences, and they get worse the longer the misreading holds. The first consequence is the smallest. The person repays the persona tax. They force the old performance back on, work to win the old attention back, and in doing so, they reset the entire process to zero. The quiet ends, the calls return, and they have spent real effort buying back the exact thing that was draining them in the first place. The second consequence goes deeper. When someone chases the old audience hard enough, the mask stops being a habit and starts becoming an identity, one they can no longer step out of. The performance calcifies. And there is a far worse version of this waiting at the very end of the process, which we will get to, because it is the single most important warning in this whole video. The third consequence is the one that actually costs a life. The person concludes that something is permanently wrong with them, and they stop becoming altogether. This is the real casualty of the great quieting, not the friends who drifted. The self that was one honest step from forming and got called off at the threshold because the threshold felt like failure. If this is naming something you have lived, take a second and subscribe. This channel exists to give language to the parts of your life that no one else will name. Now, that third consequence is exactly the one Jung built a way out of. He described the work of coming through the great quieting as a process, and the process has a shape that can actually be followed. Call it the reclamation, because that is what it is, reclaiming the energy the persona tax had been quietly spending. It runs in 3 moves. The first move is to stop funding the performance, and this one comes with a genuinely small, genuinely doable instruction. Once a day, catch a single moment where the mask is about to go on for someone else's comfort. The preloaded story, the rushed-in reassurance nobody asked for, the laugh that isn't really there. Catch one of those a day and leave it, one a day. That is the entire practice at the start, and it is enough, because each time is a small refusal to keep paying the tax. The second move is to let the withdrawn energy recollect, and this is where deliberate solitude does the real work. Not isolation as a punishment, and not hiding. Solitude as the container where energy that has been leaking outward for a lifetime finally stops leaking and begins to pool. Jung was insistent on this. The self does not reform in a crowd. The third move is the strangest, and it is the one people rush. You do not aim the reclaimed energy. You do not decide what it is for. You let it find its own direction. This is Jung's individuation actually in motion. The withdrawal was never the destination. It was the one condition a new center needs in order to form at all. And what forms is not something the person builds on purpose. It is something that arrives once they stop spending themselves on the old performance. To see how much the handling matters, it helps to look at 2 people who both reached the great quieting and came out the opposite ends of it. Take the first one as a type rather than a name, because this failure is common enough to be almost a species. This is the person who reaches the quiet, cannot stand it, and grabs. They find a shortcut back to being seen, usually a persona louder and grander than the one they just shed, and they mistake the charge that starts forming underneath for personal greatness. They become the inflated guru, the one who ended up believing their own myth. They took the raw material of a real transformation and cashed it in early for an audience. The second one is Carl Jung himself. He hit his own long stretch of the great quieting, the years his most serious work was forming, and almost no one could follow where he was going. and instead of grabbing for a way back into the room, he let the energy recollect. What formed on the other side of that quiet was the most original body of work of his entire life. Same passage, opposite handling, and that is the whole point of telling both. The great quieting does not decide how the story ends. What a person does while they are inside it decides that. It is a threshold, not a sentence. And Jung did not learn this danger from the outside, watching patients. He learned it because it happened to him. As his ideas spread through the yearly Eranos gatherings in Ascona from 1933 onward, and through the psychological club in Zurich, a following formed around him. People began treating his every word as revelation. By any honest measure, Jung became exactly the kind of figure this entire video is describing. A man other people found magnetic to the point of reverence. And his response to being turned into a prophet is one of the most telling things he ever said. To the students who were busy hardening his psychology into fixed doctrine, into something to worship instead of use, he said, "Thank God I am Jung and not a Jungian." Think about what that takes. The man standing at the very center of it, refusing the pedestal, precisely because he understood, better than anyone circling him, how the charge destroys whoever mistakes it for their own. He was not above the danger. He was standing directly inside it and saying no. So it helps to know who actually makes it through the great quieting alongside the person, because not every relationship survives it, and that is not a tragedy. 3 kinds tend to last. The first kind is the people who were already quiet with them, the ones who never needed the person switched on to begin with. The great quieting barely registers with these ones, because they were never here for the performance. The second kind is stranger and better. These are the ones who get more interested as the performance fades, because for the first time they are meeting the actual person instead of the show. They are worth watching for. Their attention arriving as everything else recedes is one of the clearest signs the process is real. The third kind are entirely new. People who arrive during the quiet, drawn by something they cannot quite name. That something is the charge, forming early, before the person can even feel it themselves. There is one practice worth keeping through all of it. Call it the quiet audit. Once a week, an honest look at who is still here and a single question. Which version of the person was each one actually here for? Not to keep score against anyone, just to see clearly what is happening, so a natural thinning stops getting read as a personal failure. Pull back and look at the whole arc from above, and it moves through 4 stages. Stage 1 is the great quieting, the withdrawal, the room going still. Stage 2 is the reclamation, the energy pooling back. Stage 3 is the charge, when that gathered energy repoints and begins, on its own, to read to other people as presence. Jung described this state directly. He wrote of a person who has integrated enough of their own depths, becoming, in his words, a being full of some occult and bewitching quality, endowed with magical knowledge and power. That is his description of the far side. And stage 4 is the integration, when the charge holds steady because the person never made the one mistake that undoes it. Which brings us to that mistake, and it is the most important warning in this video, because it is the danger hidden inside the solution itself. The first and largest pitfall is what I call the magician trap. The charge is not generated by the ego. It rises from material far deeper than the part of a person that takes credit for things, and the most common way people destroy it is by letting the ego quietly claim it as personal superiority, as proof that they are simply better than everyone around them. Jung named this danger without any softening. He said the ego becoming this kind of figure entails a psychic danger of a subtle nature. And he named the figure a person is tempted to become at exactly that moment. He called it, in his own words, the figure of the magician. The magician trap is the moment the earth decides it is the sun. The second pitfall is subtler. It is letting the new attention slowly re-become an audience to perform for. The persona tax, reintroduced in a better costume. The quiet hands a person's energy back, and the temptation is to immediately start spending it on being seen again. The third pitfall is turning the sharpened perception the quiet gives against other people. The great quieting tends to make a person a far better reader of everyone around them. That reading can be used to understand, or it can be used to manipulate and manage. Jung's whole ethic points one direction here, and it is worth being honest that the skill cuts both ways. Comment: I didn't realize the charge could be the trap. Step all the way back, and the great quieting turns out to be older and larger than any one person's life. Every era mistakes the loud for the magnetic. At any given moment, the person working hardest to be seen reads right then as the magnetic one. But the people a culture actually remembers as magnetic, the ones whose presence outlived them, almost always went quiet first. Unseen, drifting, apparently in decline, right up until whatever they were carrying became impossible to ignore. The great quieting is not a private misfortune that happened to one person specifically. It is the shape the process has always taken, and it has always looked from the inside like being left behind. So come back to Daniel, the man we started with. Daniel did not lose his magnetism in that quiet. He ran out of willingness to keep performing, and on the far side of it, the people who found him found the actual person, some of them for the first time. And if the room has gone quiet around you lately, this is the part meant for you directly. If the calls slowed, if the version of you that was always easy to be around has quietly gone offline, if you have been reading all of it as evidence that you are losing something, understand what Jung actually found. You are not disappearing. You are in the great quieting, and it has only ever shown up right before the real thing forms. Hold on to one last image, because it is the entire difference between the magnetic life and the magician trap. Jung's final picture of a healthy self was not a person standing at the center of their own power. He described the ego, the everyday I, as relating to the deeper self, very much as the earth revolves round the sun. You are the earth. The charge, when it comes, is the light. Your only work is to keep orbiting it honestly and never once mistake yourself for the sun. Do that, and the quiet you are in right now is not the end of anything. It is the first stage of becoming someone a room turns toward without ever knowing why. 30 minutes ago, this probably felt like decline. Now it has a name, a mechanism, a shape, and a warning. That understanding is the thing you keep. So tell me which stage you are standing in right now. The great quieting, the reclamation, the charge, or fighting the magician trap. Comment the one that just described your life, because those answers become the next videos. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com.